Hello and welcome to the Echo Chamber podcast. My name is Tony Groves and today I'm one third of what promises to be a fun and informative show. Remember folks, the Echo Chamber podcast is a free-flowing conversation that may occasionally touch on mature subjects. As always, I'm joined by my co-host Martin McMahon. How are you, Martin?
Hey Tony, how are you?
More importantly, we're delighted to be joined in the Tortoise Shack by independent TD Joan Collins. When the book is written on the era of austerity, Joan, in my opinion, will be remembered as a constant voice for the people. Her challenging of the prom notes alone is the battle cry that rejected the BS of "sure we are where we are." Joan was also came to prominence with a shall we say, greetings to Bertie Ahern, and as he was leaving with a golden parachute, Joan called out what was actually going to go wrong. And you know what, Joan? The last decade has just proven you were right. Thanks so much for joining us, Joan. Great to
great to be here. Great to be here.
So how was it? How was it to cut the legs from under Bertie?
It wasn't planned in any shape or form. We actually had called a protest because it was the last Friday of the first month that people had seen their pay packets been cut. And we had a protest to show that. And he just happened to come outside and do the interview, and I was just looking at him and just getting so angry.
I can't imagine it.
I was saying to people that were there with me, come on, we had to go over and challenge this sod. Then I just went over and challenged him, you know. It was quite spontaneous from that point of view. So, and then I went home. I went back to work that day actually, and then I started getting texts and phone calls to say you're on the Joe Duffy and all that sort of stuff, you know.
And during it all, like when we go, like when we reduce it back down to that little glimpse of what was really happening, was that there was people actually shuffling off. Central bankers, senior civil servants, and the likes, that actually the architects of the crash, if you want to give them a better terms, you know, even in the banks, the boards of the banks all slipped away. I know poor Fred Goodwin in the UK went from Sir Fred to just Fred, but he still slipped away with a big pension, and you know, RBS were forced to send billions over to Ulster Bank here. These things all happened, and yet we all just immediately went to this mindset that, you know, we the line of "sure we all partied."
It was an horrendous comment. I always remember Enda Kenny over with, you know, in Europe.
That's right, yeah.
That we all partied, and you know, the fact of the matter was, and it was a comment by Warren Buffett in about 2008 that there was a class war going on and they were winning, and that was before the austerity even kicked in, before we found out that the banks were insolvent and playing Russian roulette with our money. They used the austerity really then just to kick it in even harder, you know. They cut nearly 10 to 15% of people's living standards down very, very quickly.
Well, we had the figures out just yesterday, 3,333 homeless children in Ireland, and none of those children partied. Those children weren't responsible in any way. These are the people who didn't benefit in any way from the Celtic Tiger. The 80s never left for them.
That's right. Yep.
And they're still in the 80s now today.
Yep. It's the same, you know, any of the statistics you get from the CSO and that, places like Dublin South Central, Crumlin, all around there, never benefited from the Celtic Tiger.
Yeah.
Ever, you know.
And when they say people partied, I mean, anybody I knew that was working, they were working their arses off. They were doing 60 hours a week, overtime. They were anything they could to get the moolah in. That's not partying. That's taking the opportunity to work hard and earn a few bob.
And many people were forced out of Dublin who worked in Dublin, buying houses in Leitrim and, you know, all over the country, Ashbourne, and driving huge distances to come in the morning, getting their kids to school or into creches and all that. And that was before.
They were all told, that generation were told, this is the foot on the ladder that you need to do. And it was, you know, say you started in Navan, they used to say, next stop Swords. Because once you trade up, you can get the Swords. And maybe eventually you'll get back to Phibsborough or whatever it was that you started life out in. And it was literally the step along the property ladder. We had Lorcan Sur in here now, and he said there's not even any steps left on the ladder. There's simply the haves and the have-nots. And if Mammy and Daddy aren't the have, then the children will always be the have-nots, unless, you know, we have some sort of structure that tackles this. And you know, you're in the Dáil. Do you see any white smoke in terms of tackling the housing crisis?
No. Absolutely not, unfortunately. And I was making the point there on the child homelessness last Friday that, there has been a call for a demonstration the 7th of April. I think that's way too far away. But it is what it is. Been called by the Congress of Trade Unions and the Housing and Homeless Network. But what the message we want to try and get out is it is about homelessness, but it's not just about homelessness. This is about the generation of under 35s who will never, ever have the opportunity to be able to get a mortgage, go into a bank and buy a house.
It's housing solutions or accommodation solutions. I mean, it's not just build houses, rents. Mm-hmm. Everybody's priced out on rents. We now have the highest rents we've ever had in the country.
Our rent figures are 20% above the Celtic
That's
Tiger,
right.
and more scarily, they're up 9% since they introduced the 4% rate.
Yeah,
so clearly the rent pressure zone restrictions have failed.
Yeah,
enough landlords have used whatever. It comes back to whether there's a degree. 3,300 homeless children, nearly 9,000 people overall. It grew at its highest rate as in the last 18 months. That's the highest rate in 18 months. And this in the same week that the government decided to repay Denmark 400 million that it owed, that wasn't to fall due until early 2022. And I'm going to give you the statistics of that, Martin. What that actually means is that they've decided that we can borrow at a lesser rate to pay back debt that we borrowed initially at a higher rate. So financially that makes sense. But if you were to say in the greater scheme of things, if you can borrow at effectively zero interest rates, which Ireland now, because we're now all of the rating agencies who buried us for the last decade have said we're all great again, we can borrow at effectively 0% interest rates. The fact that we won't do it to kickstart a public housing or a social housing building plan, that says everything about ideology.
Oh, absolutely, and it is ideological. Can't get that word out. Ideological. The fact of the matter is that this government has said, and Owen Murphy has said, that there is no problem with money.
Yes.
There's no problem with money. We have the money.
He's repeated that.
Yeah, over and over again, and yet the concept of building public housing and public lands just is way beyond what they can even consider.
Well, Leo gave himself away earlier in the week.
No free housing, yeah.
Free housing. And the idea that people who live in social housing pay for the social housing. Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael need to get over this hump where they're thinking it's free housing. It's not free housing.
Tracy McGuinness responded, because I put a tweet up saying about that. Of course he said it, that there was... the master of sense of entitlement talked about people shouldn't be entitled to a house, was more or less what he said. And Tracy McGuinness, who cares for her severely, chronically ill child, right. She said, my son isn't entitled to a house. He deserves the world. And she can't get out there and earn the wage, and she put earn in inverted commas that actually can pay for a house. But the work that she does as a carer has a value, and it's and it has a huge value, and she was spot on. She just reduced his entire argument in
well, if you looked at Liveline last week, we had these people on, and they were saying that they want to vet people moving into buying in their I'm like, are you people off your rocker? Do you understand how any of this works? People who are one generation removed from social housing themselves all of a sudden get the snobby attitude on, and it's, we want a vet who moves in next door. To cop on to yourselves.
You see, this is what's behind the government, particularly Fine Gael. What they're trying to do is get that layer of people that went into negative equity and all that out of that.
Yes. Absolutely.
And buy them off from the point of view of votes and that.
Feel better now that you're out of negative.
That you're out of negative, but you still owe a huge amount of money. I mean, that's the point I made again on Friday.
You've lost a decade.
Yeah, absolutely. And the point about it is that for people in the last 7, 8 years, it's like being locked out of your workplace for 8 years. And it's very hard it's structurally damaging to people, because it's very hard to get out. If you're even out of work for 4 weeks in the strike issue, it takes a long time to get yourself back on your feet, because you have to borrow money or, all that type of thing. And that's what's happened. And we are in a situation now, for even the EAPN report, the European Anti-Poverty Network yesterday, about poverty levels. It's they're not addressing the issue.
1 in 9 people in Ireland in consistent poverty.
Consistent poverty. And the government have set themselves a target that only 4% will be by this year, 2% by 2020. The structure is there, and unless you get a complete change in thinking, about minimum wages, about decent work, proper work, all that type of thing, that you're able to get a house without having to go in and borrow massive amount of money, 320 grand. Leo Varadkar opened up a housing estate there recently, and he said there was affordable houses in it. There were €320,000 to €380,000. You'd have to earn 100 grand a year.
You'd have to be Leo.
Yeah, you'd have to be Leo, to get them.
It's
beyond the reach of a retail worker, or a construction worker, or a carer, or anything.
And sadly, that's the other thing that I know you're passionate about, is the fact that over the last decade, what's actually developed as well is that the workers' terms and conditions and rights have actually been diminished, and what we've ended up with is that people coming into the workforce, they may not have 0-hour contracts, but they have low guaranteed hours. They have
well, I know Regina brought in her new bill, and I've gone through it.
Right, yeah.
Okay, and I'm saying it misses the target by a very big way, because all these guys do then, they bring in these new rules, you can't do A, B and C. These guys go, okay, you're all self-employed and we can do exactly what we like with you. And I met with Regina, and I've discussed bogus self-employment, and I am not going to let up on it until the whole story comes out. And I know the whole story because I was involved in it from the get-go.
Right.
So I'm not going to let up until everybody who was involved in it, and there was a meeting where they were all involved.
Okay.
Until that comes out in the public arena, I'm not letting up on it, because that's why we are where we are. So conditions are just going to go down and down.
I don't know, Martin. I think conditions have it's the government's mentality and everything. Things are getting worse at a slower rate than they used to be, and that's the good news, if you know what I mean. It's the same what they said yesterday. There was yes, homeless figures are up, but things it's getting worse at a lesser rate than it used to be. Like Joan, you're on the front line. You're an independent TD, so but you have to be almost kicking tires everywhere to raise awareness.
Yeah. And again, the point I raised in the Dáil there, and leaders' questions, was that when they were having this sham game there about the elections and all that, that 2 men died on our streets. That week alone, 2 families came into us with notices to quit from landlords who wanted to get rid of them effectively. And we have made a policy in our office that anyone who comes into us, we will not allow them to be evicted, and we will do everything in our power to stop that an eviction in any shape or form. And we tell people to overhold everything that needs to be. If you've nowhere to go, you cannot.
Now I have a friend. I have a friend with 2 children who's facing exactly that situation in February. She's been on HAP for 2 or 3 years, 2 years, and in an area. The Swords is massive. Nobody is taking HAP. Nobody is taking HAP.
Why would you when you can get free market rents?
Yes,
but she is going to be homeless with 2 children in February, and she has known for 6 months that she has to get out of the place that she's in, and yet there is nobody who can help. There is nobody who's saying they increased her HAP payment slightly to put her into a better place. A woman with 2 kids is facing homeless, and the whole world's just walking by and saying, don't care, sorry.
Well, in many ways, a lot of people have their own issues. Everybody's trying to deal with their own issues in their own household. No one knows what goes on behind closed doors and how families are trying to keep things ticking over. And that was one of the issues for me, if there had been a general election, is knocking on people's door looking for a vote when people are struggling to get food on the table and the presents for the kids, and
Oh yeah.
And until you go knocking on doors, you don't really know what's going on, And I'd advise anybody who's getting a notice to quit from a landlord, immediately approach Focus or any of those groups to take the case to the RTB if you feel there's anything in that notice to quit that's out of, ordinary or it's not within the legal limits, and overhold. Because if you've nowhere to go, you have to stay where you are.
And it seems to be that you have to present homeless before anybody will help you in the state. You must actually present as homeless.
Yeah,
you
don't
can't say
accept.
next Tuesday I'm going to be homeless.
No, you have to actually be
in that situation before.
Which seems you have to jump off the cliff before anybody will even think about you.
And I think that, and a lot of people don't actually come out publicly and say it. I mean, who wants to go out to somebody and the next door neighbour and say, I'm going to be evicted next month or whatever, you don't like saying things like that. It was like when we were knocking on the doors in 2009 and 2008. People weren't coming out to the door saying, we can't pay our mortgage, or, we're in mortgage arrears or anything. People don't like hanging out their dirty laundry, but I would advise people to come out and do that, because there are groups out there that will support you.
There must be, because there's 37,000 mortgages over the 2-year arrears thing that are so literally, if they're there, that's your brother, your sister, your cousin, your niece, your nephew, or whatever.
I don't remember, was it Owen or was it Lorcan or was it Rory told us that there are 250,000 homes or people in some sort of difficulty somewhere along the line.
What you have, you see, when you factor in the buy-to-lets, Martin, the huge volume of buy-to-let mortgages, like family homes appear as, people have a mortgage on their family home, which is a huge number anyway. But then you factor in the accidental landlords or the fella who used the equity to buy a place in Tyrrellstown, and then these all go to the REITs, the residential the trusts in effect that are basically owned by vulture funds and the likes. All of those are vulnerable currently, and there hasn't been enough protections put in place to give these things. I mean, we can draw the solutions are there. Different countries have dealt with these things differently. We just happen to have
Well, I was saying this week, by Monday, they had 3 new solutions for homelessness. The first was high-rise storage units, where, you can have a shutter up and down, but you're not going to have windows. The second was, what was the second one? The second one was Mountjoy. We'll open up this disused wing of Mountjoy. There's no stigma attached, of course, but here you go, into Mountjoy. And the third one was, the permanent, the photo opportunity for Leo and the Minister for being Leo's friend, where they stood on the steps of the Georgian building.
The new hostel.
Look at our new fabulous permanent hospital for homeless people.
Yeah.
I mean, these guys are doing their best to normalise an obnoxiously bad situation.
Yeah. And what's crucial to them at this stage is that the one thing they don't want to see happening, and because it'd be a huge dent in their persona and whatever, is anybody to die in the street that would be family or anything like that at all, which would be horrendous, absolutely horrendous. But they are just really working hard to ensure that doesn't happen.
Well, everybody who has died so far, they have given a nasty little, this person didn't want this, or this person had problems, and
might have taken drugs, or may have been an alcoholic, or
was known to police as a favourite as well, you know.
But and to me, this is why they're putting so much money into the interim measures, the hubs and the shelters and all that type of thing, because they just that to them is crucial, not to have a family on the streets in any sort of situation that they could be very, very vulnerable, and in the meantime, the structures are not being changed. The structural deficits for people are still there.
Yeah,
and I'm going to go back to what you said, Martin. The person tell them to come out, and people will go out and support them. We will. There's no doubt about it. Because I know from now until April, there's going to be actions taken all around the country. As many homeless groups as possible. Hopefully taking over empty accommodations, renovating them, put families into them. Things to push the issue. Because it just can't continue the way it is. It can't.
Well, we were very lucky. Obviously, we've had a lot of people in here talking about homelessness, but not just homelessness. Let's be honest, it's about the austerity and what it meant. And I think, wasn't it Mary McAuliffe said to us that we convict the poor in Ireland of poverty. That's what she said we do. And, you know, she looked at it through the prism of the Magdalen laundries and, you know, the workhouses and these. But so in many ways, the most recent generation are still suffering the hangover of the promissory notes and the bailout. And I know, you know, this is something that you are very passionate about, you know. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how it begins and ends there in some ways?
Well, it begins with the fact that obviously the Irish people were forced to pay the highest amount of the debt by the banks. We had the Labour Party saying, you know, not one red cent, burn the bondholders, everything that went around at the time. And we were bullied into paying that, and we did it.
The expression was it a bomb would go off?
A bomb would go off in Dublin, that's what was said. And these are people that played Russian roulette with our money. We, as you said, people did not party. Majority of people did not party. And what happened at that point of the crash was that all those who sold property just at that point in time made huge killings, and they became wealthier. And those that sold it, obviously, were hit by it. But the majority of citizens have been literally lampooned with this debt for the next generations. I think you made the point about Denmark. We paid, what was it,
400 million.
400 million
them this week.
And that is a structural part, when we're talking about structures and all that, of the austerity, is paying that debt back.
These things are all connected.
They're all connected, absolutely every bit of them. And, you know...
Well, when you think, go back to 2011 and Fine Gael, and they were so strong on how they weren't going to, how they were going to burn bondholders.
Yeah.
And none of it came to fruition. Not a bit. Enda Kenny actually got elected on the premise that they were going to do something with...
He's going to renegotiate.
He's going to renegotiate.
That was the premise that they got elected on. And they did nothing. And nobody within Fine Gael has held them to account. Nobody within Fianna Fáil. Nobody within Labour. Nobody has said, well, actually, what your one overriding tenet of being in government, you haven't come close. Nobody did it.
Well, it begins with 41% of the total European bank bailout landing on the shoulders of the Irish taxpayer. It begins there in terms of just those financials. And, you know, that's every man, woman and child here in this country is now actually paying back.
Well, I think there was a big visual thing to it, Joan. And it's an image that sticks in my head. You were arrested by two big, burly...
coppers.
Gardaí who, because you're so dangerous and you had to be, you know, held but the government tried to put this message across that anybody who opposed what they were doing was somehow the enemy, that you were the enemy. I mean, it was
a conscious decision where the police at the higher levels met with government and with Irish Water to actually do that, because up to that point when we were campaigning in Crumlin and we were stopping the water meters going in, we had a very good relationship with the superintendent in the local guard station. He knew it was peaceful. He knew it was the local people in the area. You know, they'd come up, check everything was okay, and then we'd either march the crews out or do whatever we did. But that morning we went down, and we could see it developing over the couple of weeks before that when we were down in other parts of the city. The guards were coming in much more determined to try and break it. We were down in Rialto, in the cottages down there. Guards had been brought in from Donegal that morning, that night, the previous night. It was brought down from
Donegal. There's a culture shock for you, Donegal to Rialto.
Yeah, absolutely. But they were being brought in, and we knew that the situation had changed. And when we went down to Parnell Road that morning, I mean, the amount of... It wasn't even the local guards that were there. They were from a different jurisdiction. They were from Rathmines, Ranelagh area. There was no talking to them. They didn't want to negotiate, didn't want anything like that at all. So we had to make the decision there that morning when we talked to the local people. And we said, well, what do you want to do? Do we stand our ground? And they were saying, yeah, we have to stand our ground. And that's when myself and 13 others were arrested that same day, that same morning, you know, most of them local. And then we saw the Jobestown, all that sort of happening around the same time.
And we had, again, people standing in the door actually making equivalences with ISIS.
That's right. That's right.
This is a nice situation.
Joan, I'm sorry now, but I that's why I had the metal detector on the door when you came in, because I was just worried that you were definitely armed.
Yeah, I see this special rancher parked outside watching you.
But I mean, and you're right, Martin. There was a message to say to people that even public representatives can be arrested. You know, no one is untouchable from the point of view of what the state can do. But this has been going on for donkey's years as well. Look at all the, you know, the whistleblowers, with the amount of cases that we have of people come approached us, particularly Mick and Claire, in relation to miscarriages of justice,
and
treated
Mick and
badly.
Claire, we don't say this enough. If it wasn't for Mick and Claire, first of all, Maurice McCabe would have been left hanging. There would have been no support. They were the tireless, and Mick Clifford, when he was here, he said they looked past all the slurs and the innuendo, and they looked past it. They went and met the man and they spoke to him.
Yeah.
And Mick Clifford was very clear on that. There were a couple of people in the Dáil who had his back, but the vast majority ran away as soon as they heard the slurs being thrown.
Yeah.
And it was an orchestrated effort to denigrate the man as much as they could.
Yeah. Only for the likes of Claire and Mick and ourselves. And I remember Luke was at the time there as well, and myself. And
John McGuinness also.
Yeah, that's right, John McGuinness. But only for that challenge, because up to that point, there was never any challenge to the judiciary in any shape or form, you know, in relation to guards. Fine Gael is the... You know, the party of the
Law and Order.
Of Law and Order.
Yeah.
Fianna Fáil, similar. Labour were part and parcel of it, of that cosy cartel, and no one ever really challenged the system. And I got a taste of what it was like, because you know what happened to Mick and what happened to Claire. She was arrested. And I was getting phone calls from journalists, and what was really terrible was that the journalists fed into it.
Of course, they were an arm of the state.
That's right, and they actually fed into it. And I had journalists ringing me up about instances that happened 25, 30 years ago on the job when I worked in An Post. You know, things they heard through the grapevine, and they were ringing up and saying, you know, is there anything here that we have to say, like, you know? And we had other journalists ringing us about penalty points that we, you know, potentially you got squashed, which never happened. But they were trying to find anything, any dirt at all that they could throw on us. And I've said before, and I say it here, it's a pity those journalists didn't do the same type of investigation to the likes of Bertie Ahern and all those politicians in the past. That's
easier to punch down than punch up, though, John.
Yeah, that's true.
And
that's true.
This is what we say quite a lot, is we don't mind any politician punching in their own weight class. But stop punching down on people. Yeah. Punch in your own weight class, you know. And it what you were saying about journalists just triggered a memory of an article that came out 2 days ago. You had something to say about it, and I had as well. One of Jim Daly. Oh my God, Jim Daly. Oh my God. Once multinationals like Twitter and Facebook wants us to present our PSC or our passport to the multinational data mining corporations before we can be approved to have a social media account. That's how much people organising outside of the system is bothering them. That they would literally give this gold data to the people who will absolutely abuse it.
And all data leaks.
Oh yeah. I mean, these people are off their head. I mean, Jim Daly is some guy in New York for the New York Times. Oh, this is Ireland being nuts again. Yes, it is Ireland being nuts. It's people being absolutely stupid.
But I think you're bringing us on to another interesting point where you're saying the monolith, as I always say, is afraid of people organising. It's afraid of people, vehicles like a bloody podcast, as simple as that, you know, being able to speak back and speak through alternative ways. But it comes back to when you talked about the water movement and then taking that on to actually developing it further into coalescing ideas for the left. I know we spoke earlier about people being a little bit disillusioned by the fact that some of the momentum went out of that, and then hopefully, you said in April, we're leaving it too late. We really need to be hammering. If there's a nail sticking out, you got to hit it and hit it and hit the bloody thing. And I what are your thoughts on what we need to do in terms of trying to reignite that?
Well, we were just talking off the airwaves earlier on, that it was really uplifting to see so many people getting politically active.
Yeah.
I mean, we were in our area around the bin charges. I was probably the most vocal and organised the area. But this time it was actually local people organised. It was just fantastic. And what we did was support in any way we could. And we met people that could articulate the fact that what water charges was about and privatisation, and every metre goes into the ground is a step towards privatisation and that. But when they went to the political classes organised by the Unite trademark and that, they were coming out and they were able to explain exactly what the promissory notes were, what's going on, what this is all about, and able to articulate that in street meetings. It was just fantastic.
And I was at a few of those street meetings, and there was meetings on Greens. There was, and it was old style politics where the community decided the agenda and passed it on up the line, and it was really great to see people motivated that way. And then as a flip side of that, I went to the RDS to see Naomi Klein. She was in the RDS, and the flip side, now you can imagine this was full of Labour and these people who consider themselves of the left, who aren't left at all, well-heeled Labour people. And Naomi Klein was asked about the water charges, and Naomi Klein was very clear. She said, look, water charges, you're forcing water charges on people so that multinationals don't have to pay tax. Well, you'd think she'd thrown a bomb into the place. The Labourites, I don't respect you anymore for saying that. What about fair consumption? And she said, no, all you're doing is placing the burden on the little guy. That's all you're doing. If the multinationals paid what they owed, you wouldn't have to have water charges. Exactly. Well, the Labour people. And it never got a mention anywhere. Not in any media, not in a newspaper. It was never brought up again. Anywhere. These people think they're on the pulse, but they're nowhere near it.
They're absolutely nowhere near it. But and you're right. And going back to the point that Tony made, what's going to happen now? I really think there is a desperate need to have an alternative, because what we're seeing is Fianna Fáil trying to take up the middle ground. They're taking all the coats and the jackets and the shorts and the vests of the left and just pretending that they're the Social Democratic Party or whatever.
They're trying to say we're centre left now.
Everyone rushing to the centre. And you have the Labour Party trying to reinvigorate itself back into the movement, and we've seen it already in the unions. I might be shot for saying some of this, but you can see how they're Jed Nash and those people, and Jack O'Connor, he's now their
he's the chairman.
And they're going around all the unions now, talking to the people they'd have contacts with before, trying to get their foot back in the door. The Labour campaigns approach the Housing and Homeless Coalition so that they want to sign up to the pledges of the homeless and the campaign.
I saw them recently use online on Twitter. Labour were using the "My Name Is" hashtag, which is the brainchild of a social democrat, and I can tell you, there really is. It comes back to a couple of weeks ago. I don't know if you heard Ed Brophy speak to Hugh Linehan, and when he was asked about Labour, where are Labour now, he more or less said, well, there's not as much anger on the doorways at the doors, so we're not apologising for what happened. We did what we did, and we stand over the things we did, but we're just trying to talk to people in a different way. And I just thought, Jesus, you've learned nothing, but you're now just trying to. You're trying to, as you say, put on the clothes of the people who've you can't, and
that's exactly what I said yesterday. I said, what Labour did, they did it with full knowledge.
Yes.
It wasn't even as if they were blindsided by anything. They did it in full knowledge. And I said, and the experience I had watching Joan Borden across the chamber in the Dáil, where she's bringing in those austerity measures in 2012, the pension cuts, the low parents cuts, the disability cuts, all those cuts. And she was just so bloody arrogant. And they've never even turned around to the people whatever about Fianna Fáil, I had no time for Fianna Fáil. But they did say, listen, we're sorry.
Yeah.
We made a mess of her.
Yeah.
And they did it publicly. But
Labour
Labour have
haven't.
not acknowledged that at all.
And
They haven't publicly come out and said, we did wrong. We did wrong as a Labour Party. We should never have done that. It wouldn't change things, the fact that they did it. But at least it's a start.
It would have been a great line in the sand.
Well,
yeah.
but for them to come back and Alan Kelly, Woody Penrose, who else? John O'Sullivan. They were all housing.
Yeah.
Part of the housing process. That brought in the HAP payments. That takes people off the social housing list and puts them on a transfer list. They brought all that in. And they didn't deal with the issues we were raising since 2012 about homelessness. We had a young woman sleeping in our office at one stage because she had nowhere else to sleep. And we had her just staying in the office overnight, and that for nearly a month. And they just ignored everything. Their Labour roots were just absolutely...
Well, it
Cut.
struck me.
Cut.
It struck me when Joan was Tatler Woman of the Year, and that to me, like my grandfather was deep Labour man. He would have he would have been so shocked. Tatler is the enemy. Tatler, if you're Tatler Person of the Year, you're doing it fucking wrong.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're doing it wrong, and that you would stand up there and I mean, Jeremy Corbyn, he was named in Railway Spotters of the Year in one of their magazines. That's more like where you'd expect Labour people to be, but up there and plamassing and shaking it up with all the movers and shakers. But there was an article some years back, and I'm sorry I can't remember the author, and he said that Labour were never actually Labour. They were opportunist conservatives. And they have always been opportunist conservatives.
Well, I think what we had with the Labour Party is that basically they were Tony Blairites, which is effectively...
Didn't Brendan Howland saying that they are now more Corbyn than Corbyn? Didn't he say that recently?
There's a lot of rebranding going on. But
There is, yeah.
I don't
There's
think
attempts to rebrand, yeah.
I don't think people are falling for it, and but as I said, I'm 100% with you, John. If they had just come out, or still, it's not too late to come out and say we shouldn't have. We had Mary McAuliffe here who spoke about how because single parents are most often women with young children. They were the worst hit, and Joan Burton stood up and called these things Labour activation mechanisms. That's what she called, which was severe cuts that actually were putting people into poverty, and to call them Labour activation mechanisms. You know,
you can't starve people into work.
The Strategic Communications Unit would have been proud of that phrase.
That's true.
You know,
and she did it with her eyes wide open, because we know from the pension cuts that the department only the year before had done an actual sort of report on how those cuts could affect people, and they black and white written down in paper. Yes, it's going to be gender.
Yeah,
women are going to be most affected by this.
Yeah,
and she just.
Did I read that there's only 1,000 votes really between Labour and Wipeout? I read that recently. There's only 1,000 votes between Labour and not having a seat at all.
But we have to rebuild that movement based on the likes of Connolly and Larkin and working class people, and that's what I'm trying to do, and I've been non-sectarian about doing it, but I will also not be walked over, fooled by groups that are just using
Larkin
things
and
as well.
Connolly didn't mind. Couple of guards either side of them. They saw that was cred, and they saw that they were doing the right thing. Another thing that gave you street cred, or gives you great street cred, is that every time something happens, the wrong Joan Collins is tagged in, and we get Hollywood Joan Collins. And she's actually come on a couple of times, hasn't she? And
she has, yeah. And fair play to her, she's sort of played it a little bit as well, like, you know.
Yes, it was very good, very good.
Yeah.
So you must be the only Irish TD that has a Hollywood connection. Now, I know Leo would love a few Hollywood connections, but Hugh Grant just gave him the cold shoulder. But you actually have that cred, and people know now that Joan Collins and you are associated.
Yeah. But I think Joan Collins's politics would be different than mine now. I think she was a UKIP supporter at one stage.
Oh my God.
I think so, yeah. As far as I know, she was sort of leaning towards that for a period of time.
But she did play it all with very great humour. When she was getting mixed up with you, she played it with great humour. She was very good about it.
Did you see, speaking of UKIP, and this is, I tell you, this is funny, and it's not funny, is the fact that Farage is coming to the RDS with, and he's doing, so they've rented out of a space in the RDS, and they're having an Ire exit, getting Ireland out of the EU. And as wolf whistles go, the guest list is a former Renua councillor.
That's right. And
Cormac Lucy from the Hibernia Forum. So and we use the word forum lightly.
Oh yeah.
It's but when you see this and you understand that this is actually, that's the hard right. And tend to be Fine Gael voters.
Well, don't forget that during the Ardashes, that Fine Gael were spoken to by, they were one of the invited guests along, I think it was Fine Gael Youth, was Hibernia Forum. Now, Hibernia Forum is like the Iona Institute. They are not a forum like Iona is not an institute. And basically, they call themselves libertarian, but all they ever do is kick the poorest. And they never actually come out with anything that's in any way libertarian. It's just like blame the poor, kick the poor, blame the poor. And I've met Eamon, and I've met a couple of them, and this thing in the RDS is going to be a real... Was it Oliver Callan came out yesterday and he said, the tickets are free, so just book your tickets and don't turn up. Now, I went back in last night and I was thinking, I'll get a few tickets, go along, see if I can wind them up a little. And tickets are all gone.
I told you to be sold out.
Tickets are all gone for it. So
it'll just be Councillor Brian Murphy, late of Fine Gael, sitting there looking at Farage going, I love you.
Oh, but there's another Fine Gael councillor, or ex-Fine Gael councillor, that's very involved, a dentist from Howth, who's very, very involved.
All right.
Keith's another Hibernia Forum, and look, I mean, these guys. I you know what? Actually, I think Keith's actually a smart guy. He's a bright guy. There's no doubt. But sometimes they talk about libertarianism about personal freedoms, but they're always at the stage of, as long as I'm okay, then I'm all about equality of opportunity. Once I've got mine, then it's all right to give a little bit back.
Well, I've said before, I'd love to give libertarians the world for a week, because the revolution would start like on the 8th day.
Just speaking of the 8th, and I noticed you had the badge on your jacket on your way in the door.
Yeah.
How are we looking, do you think, now?
When the committee gave its report there last week, and the 12 weeks and all that, I tweeted out, it's only really beginning now. We really have to get out in the streets and make the arguments, and I don't think that we should be too smug about what has developed.
I think that's important.
Because I think, people have genuine concerns, and you can't dismiss them, and we have to have a reasonable debate. And it was really interesting that to the Citizens' Assembly and on the committee, that was because of the debate and the information that people received that they made those decisions that they made. And I don't know, I'm hoping we can get that same information out to the general public. It's going to be much more difficult though. But I think what was very important about it, and I find it was the right decision to make, it was up to 12 weeks to access abortion, because it cuts out all the whole debate around mental health and all that sort of thing. It's just straightforward. And I would hope that the Irish people will support repeal of the 8th. And
I think you've just made the most crucial point, because when you talk about what happened with Brexit, what happened with Trump, what happens with some of these debates, liberals in our progressive values tend to think the purity of our argument is so good that we don't really have to have the debate. And even because you may have a genuine concern about something, that we just go, oh, Jesus, that's just stupid. And it comes across as smug and condescending, and if you can't actually assuage people's fears, they're just going to hate you and vote against it anyway. So,
well, I do hope that it goes ahead in
May or June.
Yeah, I think that probably the worst thing that could happen is if that it's dragged out much longer than that. I think that that would be detrimental to
Yeah,
everybody.
I think the government are under pressure to have it by May, June, and preferably May. June, holidays and all that. But I think students will come back in their droves anyway, like they did during the
the same-sex marriage.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great point to bring this to the end. We have to be positive about this. Get out there, folks. Talk to people like we did in the same-sex marriage. I think we spoke to people across dinner tables. So, there was all those videos of people talking to their grandparents who they thought would never vote for these things. And there's all these things. So they're the conversations that are going to matter. The ones that happen at the water coolers, the ones that happen in the office, the ones that happen at dinner tables. And Joan, I know you've been a constant advocate for it, and I think we need to be hopeful. It's nice to be hopeful. It's coming to Christmas. Let's have a bit of hope.
Absolutely.
Did you get a Christmas card from Leo? Do you get a Christmas card from Fine Gael?
No.
You never?
No.
Not a couple of $100 stuck inside and go have a drink
like
for that?
Nothing like that.
Did you pay your bar bill, lads? The department of the Taoiseach was the worst. Did you see Ken Fox's tweet?
I did, yeah. Oh, God.
The department of the Taoiseach was it €1,298 and
death to the bar.
Have you been? You've been, of course. If you've been in the Dáil bar, is it a raucous place? Is it like lots of drinking and stuff goes on?
Do you know something? And I'm not just saying it, Martin. I haven't been in it for a year nearly, but it can be a busy place depending on what the issues are. I mean, remember the on the whole question of the prom note and everything, and we were there at 3 o'clock in the morning, and the Globe affair and all that type of thing. There was a lot of drinking going on that night, and you could actually see people staggering up and down the steps in the Dáil. It was horrendous, I have to say.
Democracy in action.
And from all accounts, when Fianna Fáil were in power, they literally owned the Dáil bar, But
Leo's there. It might change to a Dáil juice bar or
juice bar and tweet deck.
Yeah. What's that? What's that?
Wheatgrass.
Yeah, a wheatgrass bar.
Yeah. Look, guys. Joan, thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
We really appreciate it. No, it's fantastic. Look, folks, happy Christmas first of all to all our listeners.
Absolutely.
It's terrific to get I was telling Joan there a few minutes ago that only a few months ago I called out to Martin. I said, Martin, I want to do a podcast. Martin, do you mind telling the listeners what you said?
I said, yeah, what's a podcast?
That's our Martin for you folks. I want to thank you all for listening and remind you that you can subscribe to us on iTunes, SoundCloud, or wherever you get your podcast from. Please take a minute and leave us a review, and don't forget to tell your friends. Keep an eye out on our website, echochamberpod.com, to find all our previous podcasts, and some new blogs are coming. You can send us an email to theechochamberpod@gmail.com, or you can follow us at echochamberspod. Thanks again, folks. Thanks a lot.